Pauline Picard vanished without a sound, her golden hair and tiny footprints swallowed by the quiet fields of Goa's Oludu, only to be found weeks later, lifeless and headless, near her own home. At the same time, a nameless girl appeared hundreds of kilometers away, looking exactly like her, but saying nothing. As Pauline's grieving parents embraced the child they believed was their daughter, a darker truth waited in the tall grass, one that would turn their hope into horror and leave an entire village forever haunted. In the serene village of Goas Oludu in Brittany, France, 1922, life was simple and predictable. The Picard family, like many others in the region, lived off the land. Their days were filled with farming chores, family meals, and quiet evenings under the soft glow of oil lamps. Among their children was a 2-year-old girl named Pauline Picard. With her golden hair, chubby cheeks, and soft giggle, she was the heart of the household. Curious and cheerful, Pauline had a habit of wandering just a little too far while playing, often chasing butterflies or picking flowers along the fields. It was a late April afternoon when the ordinary peace of the village was shattered. Pauline had been playing just outside the family farmhouse while her mother prepared lunch. In a moment of distraction, only minutes, by her mother's account, the little girl disappeared. At first, there was no panic. Pauline had wandered off before and was always found nearby, giggling behind a bush or sitting with the chickens. But after 10 minutes passed and no trace of her was seen, anxiety set in. The family began calling her name and searching the property. Soon, neighbors joined. Men walked through nearby fields and woods, calling out into the growing dusk. Women checked sheds, barns, and even wells. The village, small and tightly knit, turned into a search party. As night fell, lanterns were lit. And the search continued under the stars. There was no sign of Pauline. No footprints, no torn clothing, no cries for help, nothing. By morning, local authorities were involved. Dogs were brought in and horses were used to cover more ground. Posters were made. People began whispering theories: had she fallen into a ditch? Been taken by a traveler passing through? Could an animal have snatched her? Days turned into a week. Hope began to dwindle, but the Picards refused to give up. The area was combed repeatedly, every corner examined. But no matter how thorough the search, there was no sign of the little girl. It was as if she had simply vanished from the earth. The uncertainty was the hardest part for her family: no closure, no answers. The disappearance made headlines in nearby towns. Locals were terrified. Mothers kept children inside, doors were locked, and eyes turned suspicious. Just when the village began to settle into grief, a telegram arrived from Cherbourg, a coastal city nearly 400 kilometers away. A little girl had been found, wandering alone, confused and silent. She matched Pauline's description almost exactly. Authorities in Cherbourg had seen posters and contacted the Picard family. A photo was enclosed. When the Picards saw it, their hearts raced. The child in the picture looked like Pauline, same soft features, same light hair. There was no hesitation. The Picards believed their daughter had been found. They packed their things and boarded the next train, clinging to the belief that their nightmare might finally be over. But in truth, it had only just begun. The train ride to Cherbourg felt endless for the Picards. As the countryside passed by in a blur, hope and fear twisted inside them. They had studied the photograph over and over: the child's eyes, the shape of her face, even the way she stood. Everything pointed to Pauline. Yet doubt quietly crept in. How could a 2-year-old travel hundreds of kilometers away from her remote village without anyone noticing? Still, they clung to the idea that a miracle had occurred and their daughter had somehow survived. When they arrived at the city's police station, anticipation turned to unease. The little girl stood quietly in the corner, her hands tucked behind her back, her head slightly down. She looked just like Pauline. But something was off. The girl didn't run to her parents. She didn't react at all. She stood motionless as the couple approached. Madame Picard knelt down, called her daughter's name, opened her arms, but the child didn't move. She stared at them blankly. As if they were strangers, the officers explained that the child had been found wandering near the outskirts of town. No one had claimed her. She hadn't spoken a word since being discovered. She was healthy, but silent. After a few hours of observation, the Picards convinced themselves that trauma must have silenced her. That must be why she didn't recognize them. They chose to believe she was their Pauline, simply frightened and confused after whatever ordeal she had been through. With a mix of relief and hesitation, they took her home. Back in Goa's Ludu, the village gathered to welcome the returned child. Some rejoiced. Others watched with skepticism. Pauline had been gone for over 2 weeks, and while this girl looked nearly identical, her behavior was different. She was quieter, more reserved, and didn't respond to familiar things from her old life. Her siblings were confused. She didn't react to their games or recognize her old toys. Still, the Picards dressed her in Pauline's clothes, fed her Pauline's favorite meals, and spoke to her as if nothing had changed. They hoped that in time, the girl would begin to remember. The doubts, however, continued to grow. Old friends of the family visited and left uncertain. Villagers whispered behind doors. Some insisted she was a different child entirely. Others accused the family of lying, suggesting they had adopted a new child to fill the hole Pauline left behind. Tensions rose in the quiet village. The once peaceful air was now thick with suspicion. Despite everything, the Picards pressed on. They had their daughter back, or so they told themselves. And yet, in the stillness of night, when the farmhouse was quiet, Madame Picard sometimes found herself staring at the girl sleeping soundly in Pauline's old bed, wondering who this child really was. If she wasn't their daughter, then who was she? And where was Pauline? These questions would not go away. Soon, they would become unavoidable. 2 weeks after the child's return, just as the village began adjusting to the strange new normal, everything changed. On a warm May afternoon, a neighboring farmer named Louis Lemaitre was walking through one of the more isolated fields near the Picard property, searching for a missing calf. The field was wild and overgrown, rarely used. As he pushed through the tall grass, something caught his eye, something pale and unnatural. Moving closer, he realized with horror what he had stumbled upon: the body of a small child, lying partially hidden beneath a tangle of brush. The discovery sent shockwaves through the village. Police were called immediately, and the area was sealed off. The child was badly decomposed, but enough remained to make a preliminary identification. The clothing was a torn dress with a recognizable pattern, identical to the one Pauline had been wearing when she disappeared. Tiny shoes nearby confirmed what many feared. It was Pauline Picard. The news struck the Picard family like a bolt of lightning. The child they had taken into their home, dressed in their daughter's clothes and called Pauline, was not her. Their real daughter had been dead this entire time. The sense of loss, confusion, and betrayal was overwhelming. The villagers, once torn between belief and doubt, were now consumed by a darker realization. Not only had the girl's body been found shockingly close to the Picard's own land, but someone had deliberately placed her there weeks after the area had already been thoroughly searched. The body's condition raised even more disturbing questions. Decomposition was advanced, far more than expected for the time Pauline had been missing. Experts suggested the child may have died shortly after disappearing. But if that were true, how had her body remained hidden for so long in a place where searchers had already looked? Even more unsettling was the condition of the remains. The child's head was missing. Despite extensive searching, the skull could not be located. It was as if someone had intentionally removed it, or was hiding it. Villagers whispered of gruesome possibilities: ritualistic acts, a deranged killer, or someone within the community covering up a terrible crime. Fear took hold. Parents kept Their children indoors. Trust evaporated. The discovery transformed the quiet farming village into a place of suspicion and dread. Then, days later, another grim revelation. Not far from the original site, in the very same field, the skull was found, placed carefully in plain view, clean and untouched. It was as if someone had returned to the scene and left it there, waiting to be discovered. Forensic experts matched the skull to the remains, confirming beyond doubt that the child was Pauline Picard. How the skull had remained so clean, and why it appeared so neatly days after the body, added layers of horror to an already terrifying mystery. The truth was no longer just about a missing girl. It had become a murder case filled with calculated moves and twisted intentions. And the most chilling thought of all lingered in every corner of Goa's Oludu. Someone out there knew exactly what had happened, and they were watching. As investigators delved deeper into the mystery, the questions multiplied. The discovery of Pauline's body, so close to her own home, in an area already searched, challenged all logic. How could such a gruesome find have been missed for weeks? Was the body moved there later? If so, who had access and what motive could they possibly have? The disjointed timeline only raised suspicions that someone was deliberately manipulating the discovery. The autopsy offered little comfort. Pauline had likely died soon after disappearing, though the cause of death could not be determined due to decomposition. The missing skull, though later recovered, had been stripped of all flesh. Its placement, perfectly positioned and untouched, gave investigators the unsettling sense that it was meant to be found. It felt less like a forgotten clue and more like a message. Focus shifted quickly to the child from Cherbourg, the girl the Picards had mistakenly taken in. Authorities revisited her origins but came up empty. She had been found alone, with no papers, no name, and no clear identity. She didn't speak, didn't react to familiar people or places, and now that Pauline's body had been found, her very presence was viewed through a darker lens. Who was she, really? How had she ended up so far from the village? And most disturbingly, was her appearance timed intentionally? Speculation ran wild. Some villagers believed the mystery girl had been planted to confuse the investigation. Others wondered if she had witnessed something too terrible to process and had been rendered mute from trauma. Officials brought in doctors, child psychologists, and even a priest. None could explain her silence. Her identity remained a complete enigma. Eventually, with nowhere else to go, she was placed in an orphanage under state care. Despite numerous inquiries, no one ever came forward to claim her. Back in Goa's Oludu, fear and paranoia took hold. The peaceful village was now fractured. Neighbors turned suspicious. Old grudges resurfaced. People pointed fingers at strangers, travelers, even longtime locals. The idea that someone in the village could have been responsible for Pauline's death was unbearable, but increasingly difficult to deny. The field where her body was found was not far from where she lived. Whoever had killed her knew the area well. It had to be someone familiar with the land, someone who felt confident enough to hide a body practically under everyone's nose. Authorities questioned residents extensively, but no one confessed. Rumors emerged that a man who had recently been discharged from a nearby asylum had passed through the region around the time Pauline vanished. He was said to be mentally unstable, but his whereabouts during the critical days remained uncertain. While some clung to this theory as a convenient scapegoat, there was no proof linking him to the case. Weeks passed with no answers. The police continued their work, but leads dried up. Every avenue led to dead ends. Pauline's murder became less a case and more a wound, something that lingered in the village, festering in silence. In a place where everyone knew each other, trust had evaporated. And beneath the surface, the chilling question remained: what kind of person could do such a thing and then live among them unnoticed? The investigation into Pauline Picard's death gradually faded from the headlines, but the mystery never left the village of Goa's Oludu. What had begun as the disappearance of a curious 2-year-old had spiraled into one of the most baffling and chilling cases the region had ever known. With no arrests, no confessions, and no new leads, the case was quietly shelved. For the Picard family, the grief was overwhelming. They had hoped for a miracle and been handed a nightmare. The presence of the unknown girl, once believed to be their daughter, only deepened the pain. In time, they chose to leave the village behind, moving far away in hopes of finding peace that Goa's Oludu could no longer offer. The mystery girl remained in state care for years. Despite efforts to identify her, no records ever surfaced. Her silence continued, unbroken by time or therapy. As she grew older, she was given a new name and adopted by a family who never spoke publicly about her past. For the rest of her life, the truth of who she really was and how she came to be in Cherbourg remained hidden. Whether she was truly traumatized or simply too young to remember, no one would ever know. Her role in the story became that of a haunting footnote, a child who stepped into someone else's life and was left holding the weight of its tragedy. Back in the village, the field where Pauline's body was found eventually became overgrown. Once again, nature, indifferent to human horror, reclaimed the land. Locals avoided it. Some said it was cursed. Others believed the killer had been one of them all along, someone who had blended in, perhaps even helped with the original search. Then watched as the story unfolded without consequence. Over the years, whispers continued. Some suspected a traveling labor. Others returned to the theory of the asylum patient. A few blamed the authorities for giving up too soon. But without evidence, the truth remained locked in the past. Time moved on, but the story never fully disappeared. It lingered in retellings by older villagers and resurfaced in occasional newspaper retrospectives. Every few years, new investigators would briefly reopen the files, hoping modern forensic techniques might shed light on the bones found in the field or the strange condition of the skull. But the case always ended in the same way, without answers. The murder of Pauline Picard remains one of France's most enduring unsolved cases. A child vanished in broad daylight, only to be found dead in a place already searched. A second child appeared from nowhere, her presence muddying the truth rather than clarifying it. And a family was left shattered, their grief made worse by the cruel trick of mistaken identity. The silence surrounding the crime, both literal and metaphorical, was perhaps the most haunting part. Someone knew what had happened to Pauline. Someone had seen or done something. But they chose to say nothing. And so, the truth slipped away, buried beneath time, fear, and a village that still remembers, but no longer speaks.